Hi, Natalie and Brittany. Welcome to Hashed.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Of course. So before we get started, I would like to tell our audience more about you. So Brittany and Natalie, if you can introduce yourselves in turn, that'd be great.
Of course. Hi, my name is Brittany Kaiser. I am the co-founder of the Own Your Data Foundation with my sister Natalie, specifically to make sure that we have a future where people are digitally literate, so that you actually understand on a day-to-day basis the data you produce and how to protect yourself.
So I'm Natalie Kaiser. I'm the co-founder of the Own Your Data Foundation, advocating and implementing digital literacy curriculum in schools, corporations, and legislative initiatives to provide a positive digital future for people to protect themselves and own their own data.
Great. Let's get started. So I would like to start with you, Brittany. I know that you have an eclectic experiences under your belt. So can you tell me a little bit about your debut to the blockchain industry and what motivates you to be in it?
Of course. I first learned about blockchain when Bitcoin first came out. And a lot of my friends in the human rights industry were using Bitcoin in order to send tips to each other at the time when Bitcoin was still cents on the dollar. And so you would add that as a tip if people were to give each other good advice or were to have done good work back in the day. The reason why I've come back to the industry, I was very into it up until 2014. Then I spent a couple of years at a company called Cambridge Analytica. And I saw how much the data industry has become a kleptocracy and how people have spent so much of their time producing value, producing data, yet that data has been stolen from them. And they don't know where that has gone, how many companies and governments around the world have bought and sold and traded that. And what does that actually mean for their, I would say mean for their privacy, but mean for lack of their privacy. And how can distributed ledger technology bring transparency and bring ways of tracking and traceability, and also being able to share the value of data with the individuals that are producing it.
Great. And I think that's a wonderful segue to Natalie's question. I've noticed that you're wearing a necklace which says
indeed.
Own Your Data. Could you tell me about the hashtag Own Your Data movement?
Yes. Well, she was one of the pioneers of the Own Your Data campaign, obviously after exiting Cambridge Analytica and realizing the importance of data rights and empowering people to own their data. So we recently co-founded the Own Your Data Foundation to provide educational resources and the tools to equip the general public, creating a systemic change in the educational system, hopefully moving into the HR systems of major corporations, and also to educate legislators in the governmental changes that they're making into the importance of digital literacy and how it is so pervasive in our society and how important it is to lead a responsible, educated, informed digital life so there can be a consensual, transparent society moving forward.
I'm inspired by that vision, especially coming from a legal background. You've been proposing digital right as a new human right. What are some of the implications and what does that exactly mean?
So I spent about a decade working in human rights legal advocacy and realizing that it's very difficult for governments and also legislative frameworks to protect human rights. But the most protected legal value in most systems is property. That's usually where most countries have been founded on. So if you own something like a property, you are ascribed all of these different rights to transparency and the use of it and to be compensated for it, and then also legal recourse if someone abuses your property, right? So if we're going to talk about data rights, one of the most important ways to look at it is to actually say, hey, I produce data every single day. These are the assets that are probably the most valuable thing that I produce. And somehow companies are making trillions of dollars off of my value, so why don't I own my data in the same way that I own my car or my house? So if you think about the Airbnb model, if people want to license my data, instead of a company like Experian or Facebook licensing that data, I should be able to license that data myself. And just like on Airbnb, I would be told who wants to use it, what they're going to use it for how long, and I would get paid before I would hand away the keys, right? And if somebody decided to mess up my house or abused my data, then I would have a legal recourse for that. And that was one of the most foundational frameworks of some of the new laws that we've implemented in Wyoming, which is pretty exciting.
So before going into your legislative initiatives, Natalie, I know that you have some coding background. So could you give us like a brief description of how blockchain as a tool can enable that protection of misuse of your personal data, for instance?
Well, blockchain and distributed ledger technology gives you the ability to have tracking and traceability, and gives you the recourse to actually be able to hold people accountable in a transparent way for their actions, being able to see what's done, how it's used, what it's used for, where it's given to, for what purpose. Blockchain actually gives you the ability, the technical solution to enable a lot of the legislative frameworks that they've been working so hard on in Wyoming, because without, you can establish all the legislative frameworks you want, but without the technological solutions, you can't actually enable them. And blockchain is a very positive, progressive way of doing that, and actually gives you the technological way to do that, whereas right now it's lacking in a lot of valid solutions.
Great. So I think that's the most perfect way to, I guess, go into your next initiative, which is you have the Digital Asset Trade Association, or commonly known as DATA.
Yes.
I've been checking out your Medium page, and I noticed that you're working closely with the government to come up with innovative legislations. Could you talk through with us some of the efforts behind?
Of course. So the reason why we originally formed was because this amazing woman called Caitlin Long was working with House Representative Tyler Lindholm in Wyoming in order to combat the Money Transmitters Act in the state of Wyoming, which basically meant that something as simple as Caitlin was trying to donate to the University of Wyoming in Bitcoin to create a fund for female engineers. And she was told that she couldn't. You would, as an individual, have to basically have the same license that not only a bank, but anyone else that is kind of transmitting money as your own profession, right? And so she decided to start writing an exemption with Representative Lindholm. And from there, they realized that they had so much support for this to actually enable individuals to make their own transactions that they started to write the first definition of a utility token in law, which was pretty exciting. And from there, it has now snowballed into 13 different laws. We originally started DATA to go and support them in this effort because in order to pass a law, especially for emerging technologies that most legislators don't understand, it takes a lot of meetings. You have to explain to legislators, what is this new technology? Why is it important to the state? Why is this going to be positive for the economy? What are the protections for individuals that are getting involved in this new technology that isn't fully developed yet? And what does all of that mean? So we put boots on the ground. We flew a lot of people out to Wyoming to sit there and have meetings with everybody in the Senate, everybody in the House, and to do public testimonies to explain what all of these things are and why the state of Wyoming could become the new financial capital of the US, as opposed to states like New York that have legislation that makes it very difficult for people to even build a blockchain company, let alone to normally, do business and transact. So if you're going to look at the type of work that has been going on in Wyoming, you can look at it from a lot of different levels, but you can basically say it's been the first time where legislators have actually listened to what entrepreneurs need. If you are trying to build a business, what type of legislative framework do you need to not only build your company, but to make sure that it is sustainable, to make sure that you can do your business and to attract consumers? And the Wyoming legislative framework has really thought through all of that and also thought through protecting individuals. So there's a lot to be said.
So let's kind of dissect some of the bills that are being considered at the moment. So can you walk us through one or two specific examples, and what are some of the outcomes that are expected, and what advice would you give to industry leaders to follow?
Of course. So there's some very exciting news, which is that there have been 13 new laws that are already passed. So I can talk about some of those, but also there's some really new exciting ones that are coming up during this next legislative session. So my favorite of all of the laws that have already been passed, signed by the governor there in law, is that your digital assets are defined as your intangible personal property. So a lot of reasons why our data is not protected in the same way that our house or our car happens to be is because we can't see it. People don't understand it. If you can't touch it and you can't see it, then the lack of understanding and the lack of legislative protection seems to be quite pervasive. So for the first time, we look in law at an intangible personal property that still ascribes all property rights to your data or your digital assets. And that means that now if someone is to have a data breach in their company, you actually have legal recourse. Say you now might have to spend the rest of your life with fraud protection because now out on the internet happens to be your social security number, your banking details, anything else that you could possibly think of. This protects you so that you actually can do something about it. I was an expert witness in the first successful case against Equifax, and it was the same principles. We basically said because Equifax was negligent in its security protocols and its data protection protocols, that the property of all of the people in the data leak was damaged. And so that property damage means that Equifax is now responsible for paying for the fraud insurance for everybody that was in the data leak for the rest of their lives. Now, the most exciting new law which is being considered is open source coding being tantamount to the right to free speech.
Wow.
So a lot of people who are open source developers have come up with legal issues over the past couple of years because someone takes their code and decides to develop a platform out of it, and that platform then gets into some sort of situation where, you know, people's data is breached or some other type of, you know, issue occurs, and it comes back to the developer. Now, a developer creating open source code is essentially not doing this because they're paid to do it. Usually they're doing this because they believe in what they're building. And in the state of Wyoming, the legislators think we want all of the smartest and most capable developers in the world to feel comfortable coming to Wyoming, and you can develop anything you want. If people are going to take your code and build something off of it, then that is their liability. They should go and audit your code. They should decide if it's something they want to build off of, and then they go ahead. But if your code's going to be exploited, that has nothing to do with you, and you should be free to be able to sit there and build. So it's incredibly libertarian viewpoint, but really exciting, I think, for the developer community. And I already know a lot of companies that are looking to relocate to Wyoming if that goes through.
Great.
Yeah.
I think I just want to highlight that from a regulatory perspective, most people think that because blockchain is so new, even though I personally disagree that it is new,
Right.
I think a lot of people think that you need to come up with this very difficult, massive, new regulatory framework. But what you're saying is that if you have a couple smart enabling statutes and back it up, you can actually reinterpret a lot of the concepts that already exist, fraud, property, for a big instance. So what kind of message would you deliver to regulators around the world outside of Wyoming to encourage innovation and also attract entrepreneurship?
I'd say most regulators and legislators are used to protecting individual citizens or individual investors, but it's meant to protect an individual that is living and working in that country. But if you only think about what the individuals need, you are not really thinking about entrepreneurs as individuals, and the fact that an entrepreneur is trying to build a company to solve a problem. That's mostly where entrepreneurs, especially in the blockchain space, are looking to go. And if you give them an extraordinary amount of hurdles and loops to jump through, then you're stifling innovation. So what I really would say to regulators is one of the most important things you can do is consider what businesses have to say. Consider what entrepreneurs need in order to build, and then balance that with the need to protect citizens, because it's very possible to listen to people who want to innovate and also make sure that citizens are not abused at the same time. It's totally possible. It's been done. They've proven it in Wyoming, and I think that most other states in the US, as well as countries around the world, are now trying to copycat the legislative framework there, so it proves that that type of mindset does actually work.
Great. So if, let's say, all this goes through and the business start going in, then I can somewhat anticipate Wyoming being the next Delaware for LLC.
So
yeah.
what you might not know is that actually Wyoming invented the LLC.
Oh,
in 1976.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow, okay.
So Delaware just, I guess, had a better marketing campaign. But Wyoming's come back to get them on this one, because the legislative framework that they've created has now attracted companies from all over the world. We have hundreds of new companies that have already moved to Wyoming, including multi-billion-dollar companies. I mean, we've had Cardano and Kraken and all of these huge names in the blockchain industry even relocate there, not just startups that are doing their first registration, but actually they're re-domiciling in Wyoming for those protections. And not just protections, but also opportunities. So the government of Wyoming now has sandbox legislation so that you can have government funding from the Secretary of State or the Banking Commission in order to test out your ideas, without worrying about the local regulations. So you can do pilot testing. And there's a new special purpose depository institution license so that you can, it's really the first crypto bank. So as of right now, you can't lend off of it yet, but we're moving in the right direction. So it's pretty exciting to see what you can do if you actually listen to entrepreneurs while caring what your citizens need.
So given that Wyoming has such a hospitable environment, what advice would you give to foreign companies looking to re-domicile perhaps in Wyoming and be able to utilize a lot of advantage being offered?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say it's really easy to set up a Wyoming LLC. You can do it online at blockchainllc.io.
Note.
You can get it done same day or even next day. It's very fast. Your Wyoming LLC can physically domicile your digital assets in Wyoming. So your wallet can be domiciled within the state, which gives you rights to all of those tax laws, even if you yourself as an individual are not there. So Wyoming LLC is beneficial for people in other countries, but also if I'm talking to regulators in other countries, you can start to think about what might be the benefits of those laws to make sure that the companies that would originally be created in your country are not being attracted elsewhere. But if you are living in a country that does not have hospitable laws or does not have enough legislation in the first place, then you should really think about looking at a place like Wyoming, because a lot of entrepreneurs around the world, it's not that they've built their company in an unfriendly framework and then they've had problems. It's that they've built their company in a framework that doesn't exist yet, and then new laws come in once their company has already been built or they've already done their fundraising strategy, and then they have to deal with problems and regulation that come in later. So that's a huge problem when you think about people who have worked so hard for years and years of their life, and they finally fundraised and they've built a solution, and now they're having all of these problems just because they didn't have rules to begin with. And now what they have doesn't abide by whatever rules came about while they were building. It's a huge problem in this industry because everything's so cutting edge, it's moving so fast, it's so new. So if you are starting a company in distributed ledger technology, you don't understand the regulatory framework in your country, build your company somewhere else.
That's a very practical advice.
Yeah.
So as the ending discussion, Natalie, I guess to follow up with my question earlier, what's some of your outlook for the industry? What can we expect, anticipate, hope for? I would love to hear your insight.
I think from my point of view, pretty much advocating for digital literacy, where you have a stronger awareness moving forward from the general public and every actor who's participating in this, that they have a greater understanding of how it works and that they're empowered to own their value, to own their data, that they have the ability and the solutions to do so, and they have the resources to educate themselves and really enhance their families, their communities, nations at large. A global expansion of this is really where I see the movement going.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that by saying the global expansion of this industry is definitely where it's going. I mean, I don't think there's any question of that anymore. It's you know, the scales have totally tipped. We're no longer begging for mass adoption. We're just begging for standards, higher standards of people that are in the industry, and making sure that we are solving problems and all agreeing on what we're trying to achieve.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me.
Of
and
course.
Thank
tell
you
us
for
some-
having us.
Yeah, of course. So I would like to end by doing our signature move at Hashed, which is this,
Yeah.
which is like our brand. So we'll just say thank you, our audience. And
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See you soon.